Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us here on the Daily Racing Form YouTube. I'm Gino Buccola alongside David Aragona. Make sure to head on down and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you can. You will have a lot of race previews coming up on a busy stakes weekend. We head out to Tampa Bay Downs to take a look at the field for race number 9. It's the Grade 3 Tampa Bay. Running B is installed as the 8-5 morning line favorite, David, and he's just in really nice form. He's a horse who isn't quite a Grade 1 caliber horse. He's kind of a cut below, but you look at the Turf Mile race that he comes out of 2 starts back, More Than Looks, who was in there, won the Breeders' Cup Mile next out, the 5th place finisher, Spirit of St. Louis. We just saw that one winning the Pegasus World Cup Turf, so has faced some tough company and just feels like the horse they'll all have to beat in here.
Yeah, he just feels like he fits really well at this level. He's drawn well inside. Flavien Prat's coming into Tampa Bay Downs to ride on Saturday. Feels like a lot of arrows pointing in Running B's direction, but we'll see if anybody else is able to step up here because there are 2 or 3 others that at least have run some speed figures to put them in the mix.
And a big field too, so sometimes you can have traffic, you can have other issues as we move to the pace projector and we see how they think this one sets up. They have Card Trick out front and Northern Invader, who might be a little bit fresh, making his first start as a 5-year-old. He's also a first-time gelding, so maybe that'll get him a little more focus and a little more speed out of there. Did you see anything surprising looking at the pace projector?
No, not really. I mean, you do have those 2 long shots in Card Trick and Fidelite Coyote who feel like their best chances would be to go to the front end here. And Northern Invader is a horse who's been successful on the front end, but doesn't necessarily need it to win a race like this. So I would imagine they might let those 2 clear off if Northern Invader isn't fresh the way that you suggest that he could be. We'll see what they decide to do with him. But this was not a race where I thought that they'd be going a blazing pace up front.
Then you have Running B, who kind of make his own trip. He's pretty versatile. He can sit just a few lengths behind or can be pretty close to the pace depending on how fast they go early. Let's meet the field here for the Grade 3 Tampa Bay. We'll start with the lightly raced 7-year-old Lorenz, who is a stakes winner at Remington back in September. He was in the Fort Lauderdale last time out, was almost 50-1 in that race, was beaten a few lengths. If you're just comparing rivals, he was behind and well behind Fort Washington. And then you look down and you see Running B has defeated Fort Washington a few times. So just playing that common rival game, obviously Lorenz is going to have to get a little bit better in here. But for a horse who's now a 7-year-old, he's kind of lightly raced. And really, when you go through his form, he's pretty honest. This is just a tougher spot.
Yeah, and I'll say the form of that Fort Lauderdale wasn't exactly flattered in the Pegasus Turf last week. There were several that came back in that race. I think the best finish among any of them was Fort Washington finishing 5th in there, and a few of them did look like contenders coming into that race. And then you watch back the replay of the Fort Lauderdale, and Lorenz only lost by 3.5 lengths, but he was really never in the mix, just kind of sat at the back of the pack, was barely even picking up pieces at the end. So I think it's just the nature of turf racing that he got a career best 91 buyer, and he's going to have to do better in this spot.
Running B is the one to beat. He is a very honest 6-year-old now who won the Artie Schiller in the last time we saw him on the track. He's a Grade 3 winner, and he was actually the runner-up in this race last year. And yeah, just not a whole lot to knock on him in this spot. Feels like they've done a pretty good job handling him and campaigning him because he's usually a horse who fits. Like, he's very rarely a big price or overmatched in races because they put him where he belongs. And this was a pretty good effort here.
Yeah, and this race last year was the one where he kind of announced his presence as maybe another graded stakes level turf horse for Chad Brown because he ran really well that day from post 10, no cover at any point in the race, traveling a little wide around both turns and still just barely lost against a field that was arguably a little deeper than this one. And since then, he's just been super consistent. He runs well just about every time. You saw that last race. He got a good trip, but Big Everest, who he was running down, he is tough to beat in some turf races at Aqueduct. He absolutely loves that course, and Running B was able to nab him on the wire that day, and he's drawn well here. He's got that running style where he can make his own good trip from a stalking position. He's just super logical, just not going to be much of a price.
Paros is in really nice form right now. 5 wins in a row, keep stepping up. You go from 40 claimers, another race against 40 claimers, the optional non-2, non-winners of 3, and then right up into a synthetic stakes race. That was a pretty tough field and a big field over at Turfway Park on December the 14th. So no knocks on this horse's overall form, and this is something we've seen Mike Maker do, right? Claim a horse, step them up, get really good with these horses, especially going long on the turf here. So very difficult to knock what we've seen from Paros as of late.
Yeah, and if you had told me when he won that first $40,000 claimer that he was going to be a contender in graded stakes races about half a year later, I would have said you were crazy because he beat a couple has-beens that day, had a little trouble, but like the kind of trouble where the trip really worked out in the end. But no, he has stepped up in every start since then. And I just love his versatility because he can sit up close to the pace. He can come from off the pace if they're going quicker up front. And it just makes him really dangerous every time. Here we're taking a look at his last turf race, two back at Keeneland, where he beat today's rival Irish Aces, who we'll get to in a little bit. And Irish Aces did have to go a little wider off the far turn, but he had his chance. Paros just holds him at bay through the late stages. Paros went the turfway last time to try the synthetic and beat a pretty good field in that Prairie Bayou and hit the front maybe a little too soon, was still able to hold on for the victory. He's tough in his current form, just as stepping up against another tougher rival and running B this time.
Yeah, and I think the key for me was seeing him defeat a horse like Irish Aces, who's a really good measuring stick at this level. So now from a class standpoint, it feels like this is a good spot for Paros. That was the question that I had about him, just like you did. Okay, who has he been beating? How tough really is the company he's defeated? But that was a good one, and that's a fit at this level, no doubt about it. Northern Invader is the next one up, who has some good races a couple years ago and even one or two last year. And as a first-time gelding, I've always thought there might be a little bit more than what he's been able to show with his best. Stakes winner, grade 3 placed. Can he improve off of that form last year? We certainly know the barn is just been getting better and better overall when you get more stock and you get more quality runners. A trainer that learned under Chad Brown. Hasn't raced since July, but the barn over the last 5 years off of a plus 180-day layoff, 21% with a 223 ROI. So they can get a horse ready to rock off the long layoff. And there's not that much early speed in here. We talked about the pace projector. We showed Card Trick. I could see maybe one or two others showing some positional speed. I think if you're playing Northern Invader, I'd like this horse to get aggressively handled, David, and try to put this one out on the front end. The question I'll have, too, is the distance. Not really sure how far they want to go, but I do think there's some improvement that can be had with Northern Invader the first time gelding.
Yeah, we did a video on the Endeavor earlier, which you can also find on the DRF YouTube channel. And there was a horse in that race, Saffron Moon, who kind of reminds me of this horse a little bit because they both won their turf debuts so impressively. Northern Invader, when he won that turf race by 8 lengths at Belmont back in 2023, looked like he was really going places and was going to be one of the best horses in that 3-year-old turf division. And while he's run a few races that are up to that standard since then, he's never really built on that form. No. And he just hasn't really gotten the job done against Stakes Company. I mean, I'll give him an excuse for the last race in the Kelso because the start just didn't work out. He was always out of position against some good horses, including Carl Spackler. But you look at some of his prior stakes races, and he generally gets good trips, and he just feels a little faint-hearted to me. I mean, he dominates horses that he's superior to when he's facing allowance competition, but when he steps up against other good horses in stakes races, it just feels like we don't always see the best version of him. So maybe the gelding helps. Cherie DeVoe does have great stats off layoffs, which applies to him, so we'll see if he can take a step forward here.
Eldest Son, I thought was pretty impressive in his most recent start. I don't know how it's going to fit with this group. What I liked about that race, David, is he was sitting a perfect trip. He moved to the front end, and then the heavy favorite, the 9-5 favorite, started to build up and looked like they were going to blow right on by. But Eldest Son did kind of dig in a little bit and was able to hold his spot down on the inside. He got a great head bob on the wire to win that, and he earned it 91 by your speed figure. That was a career best. Does he have another jump up in him? Was that race just because he got such a perfect trip and it set up really, really well for him? I like that, but I don't know how it kind of projects with this field coming off of that race. What do you think about Eldest Son?
Yeah, when you're watching the replay of that last race, you would swear that he lost with the head bob that he got. And I mean, he actually was able to get his nose right down to the wire at 26-1. And this is a way tougher field than that. And as you pointed out, he got a very good trip in that race. There were others that I don't think were as fortunate, including the runner-up. And there was another horse towards the back that I think went about 10 wide on the far turn in that race where Eldest Son was able to save a lot more ground. He's going out for a dangerous barn. If you've not been paying attention in Florida recently, Nolan Ramsey, the trainer, has been having a lot of success, especially with some recent acquisitions. So Eldest Son now making the third start. It's being claimed by this barn, but I think he'd have to improve again to beat a field like this.
Another one who feels like they'll probably have to improve a lot is Card Trick, just based on speed figures, would really need to improve on the buyer scale to be competitive with this group. But as we saw with the pace projector, perhaps he can be forwardly placed in here, David, and sometimes speed and pace can be the equalizer in races like this. That would be his best chance, getting brave early and trying to hang on for a share.
Yeah, and I could also say that he's a newly turned 4-year-old, so maybe there's more upward mobility for him because it did seem like he was really hitting his stride towards the end of his 3-year-old season. I think he would need such a drastic improvement, though, off his recent form. He's a little tough to build a case for.
Irish Aces is a horse who has some trouble in his running line. Sometimes I wonder if he gets himself into a little bit of trouble also, but he's remarkably consistent, David, when you're looking at the Beyer scale speed figures. I mean, he's thrown up 92 to 97 in his last 7 races. You really know what you're going to get from him right in that range. He's very consistent in that sense, and he fits well with this group. He's just the type of horse who needs the right trip, and I want to make sure I get a little value if I'm going to play him, but wouldn't be shocked at all to see him show up with a really good effort.
Yeah, and because he tends to get those trips, I think he's a horse that has become very popular with the bettors because I think there is this sentiment out there that Irish Aces has this big performance in him, and maybe we just haven't really seen it yet. He did win a stakes at Kentucky Downs back at the end of August, but didn't run as well at the same venue, I think just 9 days later, so I can maybe forgive him for that quick turnaround. And he was a good second in that replay we took a look at earlier where Paros got the job done in a high-level allowance race at Keeneland, and Irish Aces covered a little more ground coming off that far turn. So maybe you could make that minor excuse for him. But as you mentioned, Gino, he just doesn't really have that early speed. So he needs to work out a trip in his races. Brendan Walsh is bringing in a rider that is not currently riding at the Tampa Bay Downs meet. So we'll see if he's able to work out the right kind of trip in this race. I just was doubtful that he would be sufficient value for me to take.
We move to the next one. For the last 6 since moving into the stakes races here on the number 8, David. And this one was a horse who has some speed. A couple starts back, was only beaten a neck going a mile and a 16th at Saratoga over a yielding turf course. But overall, the body of work just feels like it's not quite up to par with some of the top contenders in here.
Yeah, this is a horse that was competing against New York bred and state bred restricted company last year in the NYRA circuit. And last time out, ran the best race that he's put forth so far. But again, that was against fellow 3-year-olds, a field that was maybe a cut below this one. So just feels like this guy's got his work cut out for him.
Possible Mente has been doing some very good work on the synthetic surfaces as of late. And overall, this 5-year-old is 16 for 20 in the money. Like, he just doesn't really run bad races, but the bulk of his work has been against softer company. So while he's really tough and I respect what he's done, this is certainly a step up to facing better, more mile-ish turf horses than some of the synthetic horses he's been facing as of late.
Yeah, part of me was trying to get there with this horse because I do think that his recent form has really stepped in the right direction. And he had a tough trip last time, trying to make up ground going wide around the far turn and stayed on pretty well behind Jerry the Nipper, who might not be a grade 3 level horse anymore, but he's still pretty good and has plenty of back class. And you just look at his career box and he's been in the exacta 7 out of 9 times on the turf. So that might lead you to believe that he's just as good on the turf as he is on the synthetic. But then you look at the speed figures, and of the 8 best buyers that he's run in his career, 7 of them have been on the synth. So just feels like he might have really moved forward on that other surface.
We round out the field with Ninja Star, who comes off a career best. It was a stakes win in the Sunshine Turf on the synthetic. It was one of those against Florida Breds that was taken off the grass. So good performance there. Now we'll get back to the turf. But, you know, just kind of comparing, we're talking about a horse who was behind Card Trick, and we're not really thinking that Card Trick is one of the top contenders in here. Was also behind Possible Mente on the synthetic, as you were just pointing out, maybe trying to make a case for Possible Mente, but has to improve on those rivals, and those don't even feel like the top of the tier in here, David.
Yeah, and I think Card Trick had a tougher trip than Ninja Star did when they faced off at Tampa 2 back. He got a very good ride that day. And again, a pretty good ride from Irad Ortiz. Last time, no surprise, when he won that race over the synthetic that was rained off the turf. He's cross-entered in an allowance race on Saturday at Gulfstream where he is stuck on the AE list. So we'll see where he ends up participating, but this seems like a tough spot.
Well, we finish up and we take a look at selections for the grade 3 Tampa Bay. David, you're going to go with Running B on top. No doubt about it, the horse to beat in here.
Yeah, I just couldn't get creative in here. I gave a look to horses like Paros and Irish Aces, who, as we talked about, are in very good form right now, but so is Running B, and he's been competitive against tougher competition than this. He's supposed to get a good trip. I'm not expecting him to be any kind of bettable price in here, but I just thought he was by far the most likely winner.
I threw Northern Invader on top. Honestly, I'd probably need about 6-1 at least to bet Northern Invader on the win end. I'm not sure if he'll be that, but if he floats up a little bit, that's the kind of playable price I'm looking for. Otherwise, I just don't know if there are the value-based runners I'm looking for in this field, because running B is going to be very, very tough. So if we can get a little value maybe on Northern Invader, forwardly placed, making his first start as a 5-year-old, ultimate equipment change, I'll put that one on top. 4, 2, 3, 7. David's got the same 4, just in a slightly different order. 2, 7, 3, 4. However you're playing them on Saturday at Tampa Bay Downs, we wish you the best of luck.